Hi, Katie.
Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm really, I feel like this has been a long time coming, and I'm just so excited that you agreed to be on the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Um,
me.
yeah. So, okay, well, let's get started. I want to hear all about what was the first light bulb moment for you when it came to ADHD? You were reading a newspaper article, correct?
Yep, that is right. In November of 2022, yeah, I had no idea that ADHD had anything to do with me. And I was just sitting on a hillside in Berlin looking at the city, and then I was scrolling a Danish newspaper, and there was this list of behaviors, and I was like, what? That is me. That is me. And I screenshot it and sent it to my sister. And I wrote something like, oh, this sure sounds a lot like me, but no, I don't have ADHD. And she wrote me back, no, I don't think you have ADHD either. Yeah. And then I kind of forgot all about it, or it was kind of marinating in the back of my head. And 3 weeks later, I listened to a podcast about work life. I did not go looking for a podcast about ADHD. I just randomly listened to a podcast about work life because I had some struggles with my work life. And then I listened to this podcast, and there's this sports journalist, a 40-year-old woman who had just gotten diagnosed, and she talked about her work life, and it was my work life, the way she described it. She had just crashed sooner and gotten to the realization because she had kids. So she was only 40, and I was 51 when I got the suspicion.
Yeah.
When yeah.
Do you remember what it was in the newspaper article in the little like breakout box? Do you remember what really struck you?
Yeah, it was the whole thing about the hyper focus that I didn't know what that was. That
Mm.
and the thing about doing things in the last minute. It was very classical. You can say, I mean, if I had known what ADHD was, then in adults, in adult women, I would have realized this way sooner, because it's not like I have this abnormal kind of ADHD. It's pretty standard, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I also think so much of it feels like, well, isn't that everybody's experience, right? Like that's what I kind of thought about even when I was doing the ADHD self-test, the one specifically for women. Like it was just those crazy moments of like, wait a minute, this is not everybody's experience. Like it was just that moment of just like, oh wow, this is not quote unquote normal. Okay, good to know.
I had that experience yesterday. I went out for coffee with a friend, and I showed her an autism screening test, and she was just like, "This isn't. There's nothing wrong with you if you do this." And I was like, "No. There's nothing wrong with you, but you might have autism." So I sent her home with two links, and now I'm afraid to write to her and ask her, "How did it go with your autism test?"
I know, right? I remember one of my best friends from university writing me after I had started the podcast and was very open about ADHD. And he wrote me and he was like, he's one of two friends that I've kept in touch with over 25 years. So
Mhm.
in my mind, of course he has ADHD. And he's wonderful and funny and spontaneous and does all these things. So when he said, do you think I have ADHD? I was like, yeah, it's obvious. But then there was this pause like, oh, what does he think I mean when I say it's obvious? I was so worried I had
Yes.
offended him. But thankfully I didn't. Okay, so let's go back to your conversation with your sister. So, how is she older or younger than you? I don't remember.
She's younger.
She's
Yeah.
younger. Okay. When you started exploring this, what were the conversations like? What did she was she on board and does it all kind of make sense in terms
Mm,
of your family life?
I haven't told my parents because I don't know, they wouldn't understand, and I don't know what they would do with it. But yes, and they have enough on their plate, I'm thinking. So no, I haven't told them. My sister got on board pretty fast because then she had burned out really bad a while before I sat there on the hill in Berlin. Um, and she had, I mean, she burned out somehow and suffered really badly from dizzy spells. She couldn't get up. Yeah, and she had been there's this place in Denmark called the Stress Doctor. They offer private counseling for people who have burned out. And the psychologist from their place, he had pointed my sister in the direction of an autism diagnosis. And I think my ADHD suspicion had kind of primed her for the fact that there might be something there. Um, so I think it was within 2 months that I started suspecting that I had ADHD, and then her psychologist tells her that, oh, you might want to look in that direction. And she, I mean, you know about the wait lists everywhere, so she's just started being assessed.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
For autism or for
for
both? For
for
both, yeah.
autism. I mean, yeah, I don't think she has ADHD but I mean, who knows? Because she could be really atypical, but all the things that rang bells with me, she doesn't have those things. She's better at picking up the vacuum cleaner and all the things that make my case of ADHD so typical.
Mhm. Interesting. Okay, so now you were when you were sitting on this hill in Berlin, had you already left your job at this point?
No, no, I have had two jobs in the past year. I had a job that I had for 2 years, and that was the one I had while I was sitting on that hill in Berlin. And then I found another job because I wasn't super happy in the one I had because I couldn't get the accommodations that I needed um, in the one that I had for 2 years. So about a year ago, I stopped working with them, and then I had found a new job where they had promised me. I had really been open. I hadn't said I thought I had ADHD because I didn't have a diagnosis yet. So that felt kind of weird saying that, but I laid all the cards on the table, and I told them I don't do open plan offices, and I need this and that, and I want to be able to work from other countries. I need an enormous amount of flexibility, and they had just said, "Oh, but you can get that here with us." And then I started with them, and it turned out that they had kind of oversold it, and that was really how I met you,
Yeah.
because we had to talk about it at that point, and I was like, but I thought I told them, and I really doubted myself. I was like, didn't I listen when they said that? But they said that. And then you really confirmed for me that it's totally normal if you have ADHD to really doubt yourself because you're so used to, you do miss things. You do miss all kinds of things. And I was just afraid that it was somehow me who had misheard, but it wasn't. And then I was only with that company for 2.5 months. And during that period of time, I think they thought I was a real pain in the tuchus because I kept having talks with my boss about, I mean, I called him in for a meeting, and then I told him, this is not what it was supposed to be like. And he was really sweet, and he was super enthusiastic, and they had a great product. And he kept saying, "Oh, well, you need to be patient." And then I gave him a deadline, and nothing happened, and then I just quit because I was like, no, because in the job I had before, I had that the feeling that I was overexerting myself, because of the lack of accommodations. I was I spent so much energy on figuring out where can I sit, where can I find a quiet spot. And sometimes I just had to sit in that office where I could not think. Um, so I was like, okay, I came from that. I had been there for 2 years. I had hoped that when they saw how cool I was and how good I was at my job, they would accommodate me, and they didn't. And then when I moved somewhere else, because I thought I could get what I needed, and it turned out I couldn't, then I was just like, I quit.
Mhm.
And then I haven't worked since. Um, and now I'm getting ready to start working again.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I didn't know that. Um, so, gosh, everything you just said about accommodations, I think, is so uh, relatable, but also very neurodivergent in the way that we think we will somehow get rewarded with accommodations if we push ourselves really hard and show how good we are from the get-go, as opposed to thinking of them in terms of like, this is what I need in order to be at my best. Like, we still feel like it's a me problem, not a them problem. A
I
them problem.
tried at that job. I tried from the job interview. I told them what I needed, and they said, no, you have to sit in that open plan office.
Yeah.
And then I agreed to try because I thought I can convince them. But the problem was that my boss was she wanted to accommodate me, but the people above her they wouldn't let her. And yeah, she could do some of it, but if they found out, she would be in trouble, and I wouldn't put her in that position. Yeah, but you're right that, and I've thought that in the past, that you then you work really hard and then you get what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like I've worked with a lot of clients who feel like they're getting away with something when they ask for accommodations, and that it's going to show that they are somehow lazy, and that they're going to be looked poorly on. And I don't think that comes out of nowhere. I think it's true. But
Hmm.
it's just so messed up when you when you think about the reason why we ask for accommodations is so we can concentrate and do our best and work hard and be a good worker, and yet so often it's interpreted as, oh, you want special treatment because you're lazy, and we don't want, outliers who aren't going to push themselves into the grave.
And
Oh,
that
my
was the,
anti-capitalism soapbox at the end there, but
yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
and that was the motivation of the bosses above my boss. That was, I think they preferred to have people sitting from 9 to 5 in that open space office because then they could see if they were working. And and the ridiculous thing was that what I was doing was mostly stuff I was doing it on my own. So why did I have to be there at 9 with everybody else? Um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. I feel like it's the same thing with working remotely. There's some companies that embrace it and have really rode the wave and are doing really well as a result, and then companies that are just like, no, we need to keep track of you. We
Mhm.
need to see where your mouse is going at all times, and it's just such an awful way to treat employees. But here we are.
I remember when COVID first started, of course, we had to work from home. And then my boss back then, she made a meeting at 9 in the morning, and then she also made a meeting around lunchtime-ish some days because she wanted to make sure that we weren't not working. Isn't it nice to be trusted? That's so nice.
So now, I'm curious why you would say you made it to 51 without really anybody coaching
Yes.
it, including yourself. What are some of the things you look back on where you think the signs were there all along, but they were
Oh,
just
yes.
weren't ever caught?
Yeah, yeah, because of course, it was there all along. I think it was because I made some non-conformist choices because I just somehow intuitively knew, or maybe I was just lucky, I don't know, but I chose not to have kids. and I've never had a live-in partner. Um, I just somehow knew that I couldn't do that, and I didn't really get how other people could do that. I just couldn't stand having people around me all the time. I mean, I really need my space. So I made those choices, and that's probably one explanation. And then another explanation is that um, during school, I mean, I could have a pretty flexible life. And then for the first many years of my career, I had really flexible jobs. Um, and I remember sometimes, sometimes over the years, you're like, okay, I'm not super happy. And then I looked for other jobs, but I could just see that I couldn't find anything as flexible what I had. Um, and that I realize now, I didn't really appreciate it enough when I had it. Um, but I realize now that even though we had our differences, the boss I had a boss for 12 years who he let me do whatever I wanted because he knew that I would just it would end up okay. Um, and that meant so much for me because I'm not very good at being told what to do. And he would sometimes tell me to do something and then I wouldn't do it, and then I would do something else instead, and then he had forgotten about the thing he asked me about. And so I just did something else and it was great, and then we were all happy.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you bring up we've talking about this theme of trust, right? And I think that, most of the time with ADHD, we'll find a job that we really, really like, but what ends up being the part that makes us quit and rage, or at least me, is managers, right? We have an issue with managers not trusting
Yes.
us, micromanaging, all of this stuff that can be really, really difficult. And so it's like you had this position where you had somebody who trusted you, but you also had the autonomy that is so
Hmm.
necessary to do what we want. And I think those are some things, like when people are looking for jobs who are neurodivergent, those are really important, like check marks to, or check boxes to have, which is like, how much autonomy do I have, and how much decision making? And I think why so many of us end up just going into business for ourselves out of
Hmm.
lack of options. Um, but like, but the trust issue, which I think is really interesting, because it's like one of the things I think we struggle with is trusting ourselves in a lot of decisions
Oh,
that we
yes.
make, right? Like self trust has been sort of driven out of us from a very young age. So it's interesting to think about like how important being trusted is for us, and just in terms of the way we do things and the way we think and the way we go after, and sometimes I'm going to be doing things at 11 at night, and sometimes I'm going to be doing it in 3 in the morning, and like being able to just kind of do your own thing is so
Mhm.
important, and I think so difficult to really find that perfect combination.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just the classic you didn't know what you had until you didn't have it anymore. Or because I had two different jobs from I finished university and on between finishing university and 2018, where I lost my flexible job. I had two different jobs, and when I lost the first one, I remember thinking I'm not gonna find something like this again. But then I found it, and therefore I think that's why I haven't gone off and done something on my own, because I once I thought I'm not gonna find anything like this again, and then I did. So I've been like, oh, I just need to find the right place. But now I'm not so sure. Now I cannot keep on doing what I have been doing, so now I'm trying to come up with something else. Yeah.
Can you talk about the job that you have coming up, or no?
Oh, I don't have a job coming up. I'm just no, no. Oh, yeah.
That's how I heard that. I heard that
Oh,
as you had a job. Okay.
no, I'm just thinking about getting into gear again.
No, yeah.
I came out with ADHD on LinkedIn
Mm.
last week, and that was a big thing, and it's been well received. But I also started my post by saying that if you believe that ADHD is a bloody trend, then I have this book you need to read, and it's called "It's Not a Bloody Trend," and there is a book that's called that. Um, so people they've been really nice, and I do have kind of a job interview, but I don't think it's for a full-time job next week.
Mhm.
It's just I'm approaching getting a job again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's tough. I mean, would you I want to talk about the advocacy piece too, but is there
Mhm.
advice that you would give to somebody in your position, having gone what you've gone through over the last 2 years, in terms of, I don't know, the job search as a neurodivergent thinker?
I have kind of had the problem that I kind of got nauseated when I looked at the list of openings, job openings. But now I'm beginning to think that if I promise myself not to get myself into a situation where I say, "Oh, I'm going to try sitting in that open plan office," because I'm not going to try that. I'm just not going to do that. So what I've been doing, and I mean, I can't say that it has worked. I have made an email where I ask all my questions about how how the office is and the work hours, and I send that and ask the hiring people at all the job openings that I see that could be interesting. But so far, they have all just, I mean, it's kind of like if I were in a wheelchair and I wrote and said, "Do you have an elevator?" And so far, they have all come back and said, "No, we don't have an elevator, but you're welcome to apply for the job." Yeah. And they all have open plan offices. And I talked to there was this super nice woman who called me back. And she's, because most of them I've gotten in writing because I want documentation. Um, but she called me back and we had a really nice talk, and she talked about this job, and it sounded like a really cool job and I would have been great for it. But they were 200 people in an open plan office, and they were kind of working in teams. And then I asked, "Do you have? Is it possible to go to a room if you need to focus?" And yeah, kind of, but not very much. And then I asked back to her. I asked her if she doesn't have people complaining, if aren't people complaining about this. And then she was very honest and she said, "Oh yes, they are all the time." She will ask them to do something, and then they'll say, "No, but I can't do that because I don't have enough focus time to do this." And then she even admitted that even though she herself was an extrovert, she was some very often totally overstimulated when she went home and didn't. And I was like, "Okay, thank you. I don't need to hear anymore. I'm not going to apply." But she was like, "Oh, but she I think she liked me." But she was also like, "No, no, you should take care of yourself and not do it." Yeah.
Interesting. But I mean, it sounds like how do we get past this? Like I think advocacy, I guess, is the real way to make change in this. But it just seems like there's just that shoulder shrugging of like, well, this is just the way things are.
Mhm.
Sorry, move along. And who was the
Yeah.
first person who put their foot down and said, no, you need accessibility in the workplace? Reminds me of when I came back to work after my first child. I mean, I not only was I in the U.S., so it was only 3 months, and I was lucky to get 3 months off for my first baby. But then I was told that if I wanted to pump, well, and it was a newspaper office, so it was an open cubicle or desks in the whole newsroom floor. So I was told if I wanted to pump at work, I had to asked the editor in chief to vacate his office anytime I wanted to pump in private because there was no pumping room at the time. And I was just, and at the time, I was so, I didn't know what to do. I was sort of like, oh, okay. I didn't know what my options were, and I was like, that's terrible. So I guess I won't pump. It's so difficult as individuals to stand up for ourselves
Yes.
in those really, really important ways. So I'm really glad that you've turned to some advocacy in LinkedIn. So you outed yourself. You posted a couple
Yes.
articles,
Yes.
um,
And I'm gonna
and
continue.
you said the response has been generally
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah, and there are people who are writing to me privately and saying thank you for doing this. Um, yeah, and I mean, it's so far it's been good. I haven't regretted doing it. Um, but I don't know. I mean, the way people react to it, when there are so many people who thank you for being brave or courageous, then there's still a lot of stigma if it's so brave. And the friend I went out with last night, when I told her about it, she misheard me, and then she says, oh no, I wouldn't do that." And I say, "But I already did." Um, yeah.
I know, right? I've had that told to me so many times over the years. Like, oh, you're so brave for admitting that thing you admitted in public in a very vulnerable way, which I
Yeah.
used to always think was embarrassing, because I was always like, is that brave, or are you just telling me I'm stupid for doing that? Because it feels like there's not much of a difference, right? But then, and I used to think it was this terrible part of my personality that I couldn't keep my mouth shut, and I was always stepping first and thinking later. And I think that is very much part of ADHD. That impulsively, like, oh yeah, I'm just going to shout this from the rooftops. Now I kind of feel grateful for the fact that that sort of vulnerability, well, it can feel really embarrassing, or it can, like you said, it's very stigmatizing. There's a lot of ways in which we can get ostracized from certain spaces as a result. I think, like, I have to believe that in the long run it's helping more people than it is hurting ourselves. I don't know. That's what
I
I tell
gave
myself.
it sorry, I gave it careful thought, I would say, and it was so hard to press post on that post. Um, but I had a friend and my sister read through them, and I was like, "Do you think everyone will hate me if I post these?" And they said no, and they said, "Oh, it's great, and just go ahead and post it, and then you can delay your posting on LinkedIn." So put them. I put the clock on 8 o'clock in the morning, and then I slept through it, and ta-da! They were posted. It was posted, the first one.
I like that.
Yeah, because I was like, I can't do it. I'm not gonna press that button and then sit obsessively. And then fortunately, I had other things to do that day, so I didn't look at it until in the evening. And I had gotten a lot of great responses, and it's the one I posted Friday. It's still alive, which is something. Yeah.
Um, also, well, I'll make sure to put links to them in the show notes if you don't mind.
Hmm.
So, what is the diagnosis process like in Denmark? Because I know you did the ADHD process, which wasn't
Hmm.
quick, but then you also had a not as positive situation, psychologist evaluation for autism. So,
Hmm.
what were those two processes like?
It is with the same psychiatrist, both of them,
Oh, okay.
and it's simultaneous. You have to get a referral from your own doctor, and that was a problem because she didn't want to refer me, but I managed to persuade her to do it, but she didn't really believe that it was true.
Did she say
Fortunately,
why?
no, not really. I don't know. No, you never. I didn't get any explanation why. She was really reluctant to do it. And then I think she needed to go to lunch. And then eventually she was like, okay, here it is. Yeah, and then after that, I changed my doctor, and then I had to. That was, I think that was last year in February, and so I could get a time, an appointment with a psychiatrist in September of 24. But luckily, I heard about a new psychiatrist who had just opened up, and you could get an appointment much faster with her. So otherwise, I would still be waiting. And you are kind of in a limbo because I wanted to know for sure. Also, and I also wanted to start on the medication. And then you go to the psychiatrist and you have 3 times 30 minutes to do both autism and ADHD. And the first one and the last one, I had to show up because she had to look at me and see how I presented. And on the first one, I think it was my foot that kept going up and down. That was probably how she diagnosed me with ADHD, because when I left after the first appointment, she was like, "Okay, I have a strong suspicion that you do have ADHD. You never stop tapping your foot during these 30 minutes." And then she sent me home with an autism screening. And I filled that in. And then next time I came, she gave me another one. And I didn't know why she gave me another one. And then at the end of the 3 consultations, 30 minutes each, she said, "Okay, you definitely have ADHD." And then she says, "But I'm not going to diagnose you with autism today." And I thought, because I was totally confused, you know how you process a bit, sometimes you just process slowly. And I was like, "What?" But I was so sure that I had autism as well. Um, yeah. And but she said, "I cannot diagnose you, even though on those 2 screenings you did, you scored higher than most of the people I do diagnose with autism. But when I look at you, your eye contact is good, and you're too funny." And that is what she said. And I think I just wish she had said that the guidelines were that if I didn't present as an autistic, then she couldn't diagnose me at the same time as ADHD. What I then found out that it meant was I have to start on the ADHD medication, and once I'm well medicated, I can be re-evaluated for autism, because as I have found out that often the autism will get stronger, or it will present stronger. But it's kind of funny because I have this feeling it doesn't matter what happens inside of my head. Uh, she looks at me and she's like, "Oh, you don't look autistic." And for those of us who have read Devon Price's book Unmasking Autism, we know that there's no such thing as looking autistic.
Yeah.
Um, and she also said that women who are above 50 and who are gifted are really good maskers. Ah, okay. So maybe it doesn't matter how I look like on the outside. And there are funny autistics out there. Chris Rock, Fern Brady.
Hannah Gatsby. Uh,
Yes, on and on
um,
the list
I
goes.
know,
Yes.
right? I'm convinced that every stand-up comedian is neurodivergent, just by
Hmm.
its very nature. But that's another podcast. So, gosh, it's so confusing. And obviously, if you listen to my podcast, you know that I'm endlessly talking about, what is the difference and where does one start and where does one end,
Hmm.
and is ADHD just a gateway diagnosis and all of that. But I also have not been, and it was the same thing when I read Devon Price's book, which was like, not a lot of people spend this much time wondering if they're autistic, or not a lot of non-autistics spend this much time wondering. And I'm like, all right, fine, I get it. But like,
Hmm.
I still don't think I will ever seek a formal
Hmm.
diagnosis for autism. Maybe I will at some point, but I just feel like the frustration, confusion, the lack of education, all of it would just be so frustrating and crushing. And I don't know how I would feel if I was denied. I don't know if I would feel how I would feel if I was confirmed. Like all of it is so frustrating and confusing, which then at the, ergo, I must have it if I'm thinking these thoughts. Like, I just go round and round and round, as I know you do too, because we've had many of conversations about this.
Yes.
What is it about you and your way of thinking, that really you feel you relate to? If you were to describe, like, why do you think you're autistic to somebody, what would you say?
Mm, I mean, for one thing, the screenings tipped me off when I found out about how much I scored. And I've of course taken a lot of them on my own also. I have a long list and I score way up in all of them. One thing is I'm super structured and I don't think a lot of ADHDers who don't have autism, I cannot really, it doesn't really match up because everyone else I talk to who are only ADHDers, they're not as structured.
Yeah.
And I cannot abide by mess. Uh, I mean, I can abide by dust bunnies. I don't care about the dust bunnies, but messes, I don't, I just, my, all my things have been trained to stand up straight. And I lived in a dorm when I was young, when I was studying, and there was some of the people I shared a kitchen with, they had this joke that they would go into my room and they would make all my books kind of stand crooked on the shelves because they knew it would upset me. I don't know. To and also I feel like it's my responsibility now to figure out because I tried saying to the psychiatrist, um, I think I'm autistic because this, that, and the other. And then she says, oh, yes, but there's a huge overlap. So now I have to figure out what is one thing, what is the other thing, and where's the overlap. And instead, I would really love to just have someone ask me the right questions. And I passed the screening test, so to speak. I passed it. I did really well. And I've heard you say the same about your ADHD test. I passed it because I know a lot of women who actually turn out to be autistic. They don't pass the test the first time because the questions are designed with young boys in mind.
Hmm.
Do you collect trains and planes or information about birds? No, I don't. But I collect right now, my special interest is autism and ADHD. And you should see the Trello boards I have with snippets of information about autism and ADHD. Before that, I was into paleo, low carb, until suddenly I wasn't because I was done. I knew it all, and then it wasn't fun anymore. So
Yeah.
I have special interests that are really intense, and I think I cling on to them. I'm not the same hobby hopper as I have heard other ADHDers talk about being, that they get started on a new hobby, and then when they have, okay, I have done that. Okay, I did do that, but I only did it once with acrylics paints. I bought the whole thing, and then I was like, nah, not good at this. And then I stopped doing it. Hmm.
I've done that. I've done that. Like I've definitely done that with hobbies where I've gotten really into it. I've bought all the things I needed in order to become the best at it ever, and then immediately lose interest. But one of the things that I totally related to what you were just talking about, like the side quests that we do, where it's like I need, if I discover a new author that I love, I have to
Yeah.
drop everything and listen to every book they've ever read, Google every article they've, like, I need to know their entire Wikipedia history. Like I get very like obsessive about having entire catalogs. and not just kind of being like, oh, that was a good book. Like I have to I become like a super fan of somebody's whole body of work in a way that you're right. It is very much like collecting cars or trains
Mhm.
or, the ways in which it would manifest as a child.
Do you think I
Yeah.
have listened to all your podcast episodes? Do you think I have done that? Yes, I have. Yes.
I know, right? I did the same thing with ADHD and the I'm still kind of in that hyper focus phase. It just morphs from one crazy question into another, but it's still endlessly fascinating to me
It
because I think
is.
there's more questions than there are answers, which is just such a fascinating puzzle. So, okay, so I want to talk about group coaching a little bit because, so
Mhm.
first of all, I will probably say this in the introduction, but, Annette, for those of you who are listening, Annette loves to send me book recommendations. I've had so many great book recommendations, speaking of, and also recommended Lota's book. And we talked about Annette on the episode with Lota Borg-Skoglund. So this is the Annette for everybody who has also been following along with my guests. Um, but I met Annette from we had a strategy session first, but then
Mhm.
you had been in my one of my more recent group coaching cohorts. So can you talk about that experience a little bit,
Sure.
in terms of
Yes.
just anybody who might be on the fence with just I guess just group coaching in general,
Mhm.
because it's a different, it is. I think the group coaching sometimes is more like a course than it is actual coaching. But I think, like you were just saying that you and Paige were still in touch. So, I mean, obviously the peer support and the friendship element is a
Mhm.
huge part of it too. So, what were your expectations going in?
Um, I just went in because I had listened to the podcast and I felt I had gotten so much out of listening to your podcast that I was like, whatever that lady is selling, I'm buying.
I got
And
a
that,
bridge for you.
yes, yes, and an Eiffel Tower maybe. Yeah, and I remember on the day when the email dropped, because I had bought some other things from you. Yeah, I bought the strategy session, but when the email dropped about that you were opening up for new group coaching, I was like, yes, I signed up and I did it within 7 minutes. Uh, and I totally expected that 1 hour later you would send out an email saying, sorry, they're all gone now. And I don't think that was what happened, but I just felt I needed to do this to mm, to kind of. I mean, I have learned so much from listening to the podcast, and I could just somehow feel that we were kind of communicating. We were on the same wavelength or something. Yeah. So yeah. And yeah, and then you get the community with the other coachees or whatever they're called. Um, and that has meant a lot. And we were 6 people in my group, and 3 of us are still meeting every Wednesday in a Facebook group called Wednesdays Without Katie. And we meet every Wednesday, and one of the other women from my group, we prepped a bit before this podcast. She helped me with, lights and stuff. It was great in those groups to meet other women and hear about their challenges. And we were just, even though we were from 3 different countries and 2 continents, um, we were just so similar.
Mhm.
And to find that out, yeah, that and we can be honest with each other and admit to all the embarrassing things that you're trying to hide from other people. Um, yeah.
Yeah. It is still amazing to me and one of my favorite things being able to bring groups of neurodivergent women together because I just feel like you said it's really hard to describe how comforting it is to be around each other and to sort of have this shorthand in the way that we communicate, but also I think in the way that we see ourselves in the world. It's very complicated, because I think we can, I talk a lot on the podcast about the sort of negativity bias that we tend to have about ourselves, that we see other women and we're like, they're so amazing, they're so together, and I'm such a hot mess. And we only see the things about ourselves that suck. But I think in some ways, like, we do understand that we are really smart and bright, and we have very, very high expectations of ourselves, but we are also really, really hard on ourselves and have a lot of shame and a lot of internalized stigma and like a lot of those things that we're hiding from people. And, it's, I feel like there's just a way that we can be all of that and just like let it all hang out with
Yeah.
other people that is so healing. In a way that, yeah, it's really, how do you put that in a paragraph when you're trying to sell group coaching? Let it all hang out. Like,
Let it all come and let it all hang out. And that was really what we did. And it's amazing when and it's, of course, it's online. And being able to get so close to total strangers from other countries so fast. Uh, yeah, it's, I would say if anyone out there is on the fence, just do it. Yeah.
all right. Well, you heard it from Annette. Uh, so are there any friends in real life? Because I remember you were talking about one of the things you love doing now is walking and talking with
Mhm.
friends. That's kind of the part of your ADHD treatment plan was to do a
Yeah.
lot of walking, which is
Yes.
wonderful that you're able to do that in Denmark. It's not so easy in bumfuck nowhere, US, but but you have a lot of conversations, and you've been open now and advocating. Is there, have you, do you notice that like every person you've ever liked in your life probably also has ADHD and autism?
Yeah, pretty
Uh,
much.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wrote that. I wrote something about that in the coming out post on LinkedIn. I wrote that if I ask you, don't you think we are having a conversation and then I ask you, don't you think you have ADHD? Then you should know it means I like you. It doesn't,
Right?
I mean, yeah, that's what that means. And I have the people I have been closest to, I can see that all the way, I mean, back, the four people I've been closest to, either they have a diagnosis now, or their kids have, or they're considering getting one. I mean, it is, I have, and also, how are you supposed to notice that you are not normal
Mm,
when everyone you're close to, they are the same as you are?
yeah.
I didn't know. And again, you haven't tried being inside other people's minds, and you haven't tried maybe feeling the calm that they sometimes feel, I've
Mhm.
heard. Um, but definitely that I'm drawn to other neurodivergents and I feel safe around them. But I have decided, just like I have decided not to ask women if they are pregnant, I don't ask if about this. I mean, if people ask me what I think, I will tell them, but I don't say it. I don't I don't come out and ask.
Oh my God, same. I
Yeah.
feel like also being in the mental health program right now in school,
Mm,
the
yeah.
vast majority of the fellow students in my classes are undiagnosed neurodivergents. Not surprisingly. I mean, it feels like the kind of field that would attract a lot of
Mm.
neurodivergent thinkers. And I'm always just sitting there being like, ha, 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 like I like never know.
And
I'm
it's
open
like,
about I'm open about myself and my job and my diagnosis, but I'm always like, you're on your own path. You're on your own journey right now. Feel free to check out my website.
it's a bit like I see dead people. I just see ADHDers all over.
Yeah. I feel like there's way more than 10% of the population, which is
Yes.
again, like I'm so fascinated to see what this like climate or landscape is going to look like over the next 10 years.
Hmm.
Especially with like there's so many books out nowadays and so many incredible, like really intelligent clinicians like Lota who are at the forefront,
Hmm.
changing the way people are thinking about neurodivergence. So yeah, I feel like we've got a front row seat, which is exciting. Uh,
Yeah.
so do you think you'll go back to the psychiatrist, or what's next for you in terms of the autism diagnosis? Oh, I
Uh,
also wanted to ask about medication too. Sorry, I just
yes.
don't forget about
Yes.
that. But yeah, what's going on with the psychiatrist?
I'm going back in March, but that's only for 15 minutes to talk about medication because I've been trying methylphenidate since
Hmm.
last week. But I'm on a quite low dose. I can feel something, some nice quiet in my head, that I've only ever felt, I think, twice in my life, and that was in moments of big crisis. Uh, that for example once my dorm caught on fire and someone came in, we were having a party and someone came and yelled, there's a fire on your floor, and I just remember tunnel vision. I mean, and it was totally quiet in my head. Everything, all the 100 different thoughts, they were quiet, and the only thought was, I need to go up there. Stupid. But I wanted to go up there, and there was a firefighter who stopped me. Yeah, and I get that feeling. I get
Yeah.
that funny feeling that it's so quiet. But it's doing nothing for my executive functions, and I don't know if it'll be better because I'm gonna up the dose
Mhm.
twice before I'm at the max. Um, it's not doing anything for my executive functions, and there was something else I thought about. Yeah, it's it's doing nothing for my focus, really.
Yeah.
It's yeah, but there are fewer thoughts.
Yeah, I remember. I feel like on Vyvanse too. Like I can definitely get stuff done and become like very single-minded and single tasking. It's just not always the single task I want to do. So I'm like, I can't. I wish I could figure out how to harness that hyper focus a little better. Because sometimes I'm like, yes, I'm going to study for hours and I'm going to write that paper and it's great. And then other times I'm like, no, I completely avoided that. But I read 300 pages of a random book. And you're like, well, all right, I'll take it.
That's what I did when I was at the university back in the Stone Ages. I would, when I had to study for an exam, I would read so many crime novels. And then would, when there was almost not enough time left, then I would do something, and then it would always turn out well anyway. So,
Right? Yeah, I know. I'm still I've actually kind of embraced that part of me for this second go round at academia where I'm like, you know what? It'll kick in when it kicks in and
mhm.
I'm not gonna feel bad about it because it always does. So fingers crossed. But anyway, so oh, I still wanted to ask you if you had a name for ADHD or if would you call it something else?
I don't really have a good one.
Me neither.
No, I mean, I'm
You said
thinking
you
it would.
liked attention, right? You
I
felt
like
like it should be in there?
attention because there is something with attention.
Hmm.
It's true. It's just not, as so many people have said on this podcast, it's not that we have too little. It's not a deficit. We have too much and we cannot control it. So I'm thinking along the lines of maybe the D, the first D, A, attention, D, disturbance, maybe.
Hmm.
And then you had a guest on not so long ago who said the age could be hyperarousal. I like that if
Yeah,
we
I
want
like
to
that
keep the
too.
abbreviation. But then I don't know about the last D. Maybe it could just be disturbance again. But that's,
Redundancy.
yeah, yeah. Maybe attention hyperarousal disturbance, and then it would be AHD. But no,
Mm.
We
I know.
I'm thinking it should, if you want to keep the abbreviation, that kind of limits the options.
I
Yeah.
know. I feel like it's important to keep it just because that's what you're Googling, right? And I feel like
Yes.
all the people who came up with clever names like Attitude Magazine and then it was changed to ADHD and they were kind of like, oh crap. So yeah, I feel like as somebody who named their podcast incredibly straightforward and nothing cutesy, because because of SEO, I feel like we should keep ADHD.
Mhm.
But yeah. Yeah, I love hyperarousal. I definitely relate to that. I often think with renaming it though, I'm like, would have really what would have made me think I had it? Because I'm just like, I don't think I would have thought about attention. I don't think I thought of any of that. It was really like the first thing I remember really cluing in for me was it was a question really at the end of the day. It was about masking, which was the question in the Sari Solden test about like, um, do you hate when people call you unexpectedly or show up at your house
Yes.
unexpectedly? And I was like, oh my God, I hate that. And I was like, wait a minute, what does that have to do with ADHD? And then I had to really start looking more into it. But like those sort of weird quirks so I'm still sort of feel like there's nothing in the name that really would have tipped me off at an earlier age,
I
other
think,
than just like everything, too much everything all at once. Or
yeah. Yeah, because I think what I noticed most was that thing about feeling that I couldn't make myself do things.
mm,
That I wanna decide when I do things, but I don't decide. I can get up and think, today at 10, I'm gonna be at the zoo because they had a baby elephant yesterday, a new baby, and I wasn't there at 10. I was there at 2:30. Because then I got sucked in by LinkedIn. And that's something I've always noticed, that I have this kind of weird thing where I have to sneak up on myself.
mm.
And maybe it's because I'm also demand avoidant. If I'm too obvious about what I want me to do, then I won't do it. Or I'll really drag my feet.
Oh my God, right? I had somebody comment on it's the Connie 2 episode where we talk about PDA and kind of that
Mhm.
overlap between PDA and RSD, and somebody in the Instagram commented like, I can't decide sometimes if I'm not doing something because of executive dysfunction or if I'm not doing it because of PDA. And I just was like,
Mhm.
"Oh my God, girl, save." Like it was just so it totally was like, "What? There's something in that, right? About that, like, God, I'm my own worst enemy. Maybe that's what we should call it."
Yeah, yeah, and I'm Gretchen Rubin. She has the four tendency framework, and I think all the rebels have ADHD. And the motto of the rebel tendency is, "You can't make me, and
Right.
neither can I."
Yeah. Oh, and neither can I, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like somebody in the past has called it rebel brain syndrome or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. Well, I love
Funny
talking
how,
about it. Go ahead.
yeah, it's funny how in Gretchen Rubin's framework, the rebel doesn't need accountability, but that works for us. It does. Sometimes it does. Not always, but sometimes it does.
Well, I think it goes back to that situation of like, are you in a safe place where you feel like people trust you
Mhm.
to get the job done, right? And so
Mhm.
with procrastination and some of the stuff that we've talked about, it's like, well, I trust myself now to get the job done, and so I'm not going to be so hard on myself because I'm going to do it the way I do it, and there's no way I should be doing it anymore. I'm just going to trust myself that I will get it done, and I do because it's like now I'm my own best cheerleader. And so, I think trust comes into it a lot.
Yeah, you do it in a different way than a neurotypical would do it, but you get it done. And why isn't that good enough? It should be.
Yeah, here, here. Well, thank you, Annette. I'm so glad I could convince you to sit down with me and
Mhm.
share your story. And yeah, I'm so grateful for our friendship and all of the
Mhm.
recommendations. And yeah,
Yeah, I'll
it's
keep
just
them
been
coming. And I'm just going to interrupt you here because that's what ADHDers do. And then I'm just going to say that I have four people who have taught me almost everything I know about my neurodivergence, and that is you and Devon Price, Casey Davis, and Lotta Box Skoglund. And it's just you and your podcast. It has just meant so much for my process, and I can't thank you enough for that. And what I got from your podcast was, instead of lists, endless lists of symptoms, I have gotten the lived experiences of other women. Um, and yeah, so I recommend it to everyone. I have recommended your podcast to three people just today. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Your check is in the mail. No, I'm kidding. I just absolutely adore you, and I really appreciate that. And I'm honored to be in such esteemed company as the other
Mhm.
wonderful people who I will link to. And you guys can go down your own obsessive cataloging rabbit hole into all they do. And but thank you, Annette.
Thank
It's
you,
been a
Katie.
real pleasure.